represent lead for ECHILD. And I'm very happy to be hosting this seminar today on the ILR and what we can learn from the Individualised Learner Record, specifically within ECHILD. So thank you for joining. This is one of our regular seminar series, and you can go and see previous versions of the series on the ECHILD website. We will have another couple of webinars throughout the year, so if you've got any suggestions about what you would like to hear about, or if you would like to contribute to presenting at a webinar, then please get in touch. We'd be very happy to hear from you. I think the next one that we've got lined up will be presenting some work from the IFS on the two-child limit benefits. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the ILR. This is a relatively new data set that we have only recently included in ECHILD, and we as a team at UCL don't know within our immediate ECHILD team, we don't know a whole lot about. So we've assembled a panel of experts today to help us understand what the ILR is and how we might be able to use it within ECHILD studies, what we can and what we can't use it for. So we've got Dave Thomson from the FFT, Claire Crawford from UCL, and Chiara Cavaglia from LSE, who are all experts in the ILR and are going to give us lots of good information. So we'll record the session and then we'll share it via our website. We'll share the slides by email. We're going to keep the questions to the end, but if they pop up as we're going through them, put them in the chat and we'll come to them at the end of the presentations. Or if not, just raise your hand. And any queries, please contact us. Apologies for the typo in that email address, ich.echild@ucl.ac. Okay. Lovely. I think that's it for me. Oh, yes, I did want to say for anyone who isn't familiar with ECHILD, just to give a brief context, ECHILD is a national population level data set that brings together administrative data from health and education and children's social care. So primarily hospital episode statistics, including inpatient, outpatient, emergency data. Also maternity services data, mental health services data, community services data, and information on births and deaths. With the National Pupil Database, which includes information on attendances, attainment, exclusion, free school meals, and also the children's social care data. We have got linked data on 21 million pupils, and we can follow them up from birth into early adulthood, and it's accessed via the ONS Secure Research Service. That's all I'm going to say for now, and I will hand over to Dave to start. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks very much, Katie. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Thomson. I'm a statistician. I work for FFT Education, where we study the school system in England, and I run the data lab side of FFT, which does research using administrative data. ILR is a hugely heterogeneous data set, and it's a census of publicly funded learning in the further education and skills sector. So it's similar to what HESA is for the higher education sector. It includes things like apprenticeships, classroom-based further education, adult education, community learning, traineeships, and 16 to 19 study programs delivered outside schools. And we'll have a look at the split a bit later between school and college post-16. We tend to think of ILR as a return made by colleges, but there are other types of FE provider as well. So there are things like independent work-based learning providers, there are local authorities, and there are even employers themselves who are running apprenticeship programs who, because they're in receipt of public funding to deliver further education, they have to return ILR. It's administrative data, so it's collected for the purposes of allocating funding and providing statistics. So it takes a bit of effort to prepare it for use to do research. There are 14 snapshots. They're taken each year, one a month. And the final one is known as SN14. I think that's the one that you would get to add to ECHILD. One thing to say about ILR is the data goes back to 2002, and lots of different qualifications and lots of different policies have come and gone over that time. So you can go back and see things like NVQs, vocational A levels, diplomas, and in the next few years we're going to get more and more vocational changes to vocational education through the introduction of V levels and the expansion of T levels and so forth. And one thing I would say is that there are lots of columns in ILR. They come and go over time, and a lot of them just aren't very useful. So unless you're really interested in how colleges are funded, there's probably a core set of data that is all you really need to know. There are 4 bits to ILR. There's a learner table, an aims table, and then we have reference data about the providers themselves. And providers are indexed by UKPRN, and we will then have reference data about each learning aim. That's called LARS, Learning Aim Reference Service, although the name of that has changed over the years. The learner table contains 1 row per learner per provider. Within ILR itself, there's no real concept of a real-world individual, but by matching it to other data sets, especially MPD, and adding on the PMR, you begin to see people who have multiple records across providers or over time with the same provider. The most interesting data within ILR is the aims data. So that tells us what people are studying, where and when. So there's 1 row per learner, per provider, per learning aim. Learners will tend to have multiple learning aims. They're mainly qualifications, but also include other things such as work experience and enrichment programs. The learners table contains a limited amount of background data about each learner, so things like gender, month of birth, ethnic background. There's a broad prior attainment variable, but it's not very detailed. Most of my work with ILR involves studying the 16 to 19 group, and I have a tendency to use the data on background characteristics from MPD rather than use data from ILR. Sometimes you have to use the data from ILR, particularly when you get new people to the country who weren't in the school system previously. The aims data is where the action is really. So for each learning aim for each student, it gives us a start date, actual and planned end dates, whether the qualification was completed, and if so, what result was achieved, the level of the qualification, the sector subject area, and for level 2 and level 3 qualifications, the size of the qualification. So at A level, for example, is 50% of the level 3 threshold. So if you do 2 A levels, that's equivalent to level 3. And so the aims can be used to identify what learners are studying, where and when. Learning aims are referenced by something called Learn Aim Ref. Here's an example, 603 72230. If we were to type that into the Ofqual register of accredited qualifications, it would return the table on the left, which tells us it's a GCSE in English language, and it's often offered by the Edexcel awarding body. The LARS data, the reference data within ILR, that mirrors the data in the Ofqual register. So you can use that as a kind of lookup to work out what the qualifications are. And most of the work with ILR involves grouping learning aims together. Quants, which are these learning aim references that we've just seen here, qualification accreditation numbers, they identify qualifications, but perhaps with too much granularity. So they identify the specification and the awarding body, for example. And this means that there are multiple quants for common qualifications such as GCSE maths. So if we go back to this particular example, I mean, what we're really interested in really is the fact it's a GCSE in English language. We're not particularly interested in the board that's offered it or which version of the board's qualifications it is. Our approach usually is to determine the qualification type, sub 11.0, and the subject mapping, which is what's used in Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 performance data, if you're familiar with working that out. And we tend to use past Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 data with a bit of imputation to kind of group quants together by their qualification type and their mapping. All of this could be improved greatly by DFE supplying their own reference data and adding it in. It's something I keep trying to persuade them to do. You might be interested in resit learning aims. So if you don't achieve a grade 4 in GCSE English or Maths, you're required to continue to study it post 16, and you can find those qualifications because they're flagged in LARS with the EFA Cond Fund Maths or English flags. It includes GCSEs and the stepping stones qualifications like functional skills. One thing to bear in mind is just because somebody has to study English or Maths, it doesn't mean they end up entering a qualification. So you might see some records, but no result for an individual. You might see the fact that they've studied something, but not entered a qualification. A couple of things about learning aims. Prior to 2014, ILR used its own reference system rather than the system of quants that currently used. If you're working with data prior to 2014, it's a nightmare. It really is. And then another thing to bear in mind is there are some special learning aim references, such as ZProg 001. They identify what are called program aims, and they're used for things like apprenticeships, T-levels, and so on. That also comprise what are called component aims, which tend to be qualifications. If you're going to study the 16 to 19 phase, you will need to work with data from both ILR and from MPD, particularly the census learning aims data, which is equivalent to the ILR aims data for those who stay on in the school system. And you could use that to identify which individuals are registered in state-funded education on any given date, along with what they're studying, although aims data is not collected for special schools. So that's a bit of a gap. A quick look at why ILR is so important, particularly for disadvantaged students. If we look at the population of young people at Key Stage 4 across 3 cohorts, 21, 22 and 23, and divide them into 2 groups, those who were ever FSM during their school career on the left, and those who were never FSM during their school career on the right, you can see that those who were previously FSM at some point far more likely to enter the FE sector post 16 and less likely to stay in the school system. So there is this kind of reverse social gradient, the opposite of what you find in higher education. We get more disadvantaged kids into proportionally more disadvantaged kids into post 16 in the FE sector. And then finally, just to finish, a quirk of UK PRNs, which is the identifier for providers. Some providers are actually groups made up of multiple colleges. I've given you the example there of UK PRN 1000599, and that actually consists of several colleges spread all over the country. but they all share the same UK PRN. You can use in the AIMS data a column called DELLOC postcode, delivery postcode, to infer the campus and college. And there's also some missing data in the provider's reference table for reasons I've never really established. So you would see AIMS data, for instance, for a provider, but no corresponding record in the provider's table, although you can refer back to the UK Register of Learning Providers to check, to get some basic details. I think that's it from me.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, I think Chiara's next. There we go, you can see the slides now, but you're muted, Chiara.
Sorry, everything froze. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, good. Okay. And can you see my slides? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you, Dave. So now I'm gonna talk to you a bit more about applied examples on basically on how I've used ILR, examples of how I've used ILR. So I'm a research economist at the Center for Economic Performance, and I've been working on ILRs on the ILR data for over 10 years, as I do research in education and training, and mainly focus on vocational education. So the first, these are the three projects, and I've tried to select a project so that each project is using a slightly different ILR data set. And I'm trying to kind of highlight what are the main variables needed that we have used for each of the projects. So the first one is a project on the evaluation of the apprenticeship grant for employers, which was a national scheme that was created to incentivize the number of apprenticeship starts for small and medium enterprises that were new to apprenticeships for apprentices, for young apprentices. Then this project, this national policy got provided some additional flexibility 3 years after the start to some specific local authorities. So the question of this research was to see whether the local flexibility increased apprenticeship starts relative to areas that kept the national scheme. And the methodology that we used was a difference in difference, where we compared the areas that got this additional flexibility with the control areas, and we did a large amount of robustness checks. And we also did some analysis by firm size and by age. So in order to do this, we obviously used we only used the ILR, which, as Dave mentioned, is contained basically all public funded apprenticeship in England, and we used it for just the period that we needed to evaluate the policy. And we aggregated this data set to a data set that contains cells. Each cell contained the number of starts per local authority, month, firm size, and age. Then we matched it to the employer data service to have information on firm size. So to do that, the variables that we needed were the apprenticeship age at start, the start date, month and year of start. We needed to identify the local authority, so we used the learner and the learner postcode. We also tried with the delivery postcode, but if I remember correctly, there were a bit more missings there, so we tried with both. the employer reference to link it to the EDS to find the firm size. And then we use, obviously, so to, as Dave mentioned, there is a program type variable that allows you to identify what type of aims you are, basically, there are. And there is a special code for apprenticeships. So basically, we use the program type just to select all the apprenticeships. And then and then we used the learning and reference, which was basically the identifier of each learning aim, and the outcome flag, which is the variable that identifies whether an aim has been achieved, has been withdrawn, if there is a break. Because as Dave mentioned before, so that it's not like school records where you have maybe one line per qualification or very few lines per qualifications. Here, you don't, not only you have one line per subject, but you have multiple lines per subject, because it is possible that a learner has started an aim, is starting a given subject, then for some reason it transferred to another provider, or that it is taking a break, or that it doesn't achieve the aim, so it starts again the new aim later. So in all these instances, you will have the current aim line will stop and a new one will start. So for the same basically aim, for the same subject, you will end up with a large amount of lines. So it is useful to understand why aims have been kind of stopped and why there are duplicates to understand how you can actually simplify them. And this was my first project, so I found it quite overwhelming to work with the ILRs, and I found that especially here, it was looking at the apprenticeship starts, so I found it super useful to compare what I would get after cleaning the data set with the official statistics. So for example, in this case, I had to kind of reiterate and to kind of refine the deduplication process a couple of times until my number of apprenticeship starts in England, so nationally by year, was similar as possible to the counts that the DFE provided by year. So, and well, this project just gave, for information, found that flexibility had zero effect on start, because it is possible that the negotiation was, the devolution was negotiated along the wrong margins. Basically gave more flexibility to larger firms, whereas the national scheme suggested that it was smaller firms that were taking up this policy. And obviously, why did I need the ILR? Because there is no other sources that would capture every apprenticeship start at this level of granularity. So it was important for the difference in different design. And a second project, instead, it's more, so this project is a project that is more, that is looking at the effect of the Great Recession in England on the choices of young people. So we wanted to look at whether increase in unemployment, in youth unemployment, would affect what the young people were doing as activity, whether it would have increased enrollment in school, whether this was translated in more qualifications, and whether it had some earnings effects. So already I can say that for this project, we didn't use the ILR alone, but we used the ILR, NPD data, and HMRC data within the RIO, basically, data set. And just to give an idea of the methodology, we compared the cohort that were too young to be, that were doing all the, cohort that were doing all their education decision during the recession, with cohort that had already been through upper secondary education. And we interacted this with the severity of the crisis at the local authority level. And then we were interested in enrollment at age 17 and 18, qualifications at age 20, and earnings at age 23. Earnings and employment. So, as I mentioned before, for this project, we used ILR linked with within the LEO data. And what was fundamental for us for this project is that the ILR record used together with Key Stage 5 and ESA allows to basically to provide you with the complete picture of all post-16 education, the publicly funded post-16 education. And with ESA, you also have the higher education records, and it allowed us to create a yearly measure of qualification by cohorts. And so for each qualification, we could get the level, the subject, the type, whether it was the vocational or academic, and the achievement. And we also used the guided learning hours, which is a variable that basically it tells the minimum amount of the supervised hours for each qualification, for each aim. That is that we use as a proxy for the intensity of or the size of the qualification. So the variables that we needed especially from the ILR was in this case the pupil reference number, the one that is used to be linked to the MPD, to be linked to LEO. Then the learning aid reference, the subject of the qualification, the start and end date of each qualification, the guided learning hours, completion state and achievement. Whereas then we took as and as they mentioned, we also tend to use when we can. So in this case, we could, because LEO basically is linked to MPD data, we take all demographic characteristics and the socioeconomic characteristics from the MPD data, in particular from census. So we took the local authority from the MPD census. And we found that the recession raised enrollment and qualification, especially vocational qualification, and that younger cohorts who basically did all their education during the recession were better off with respect to the older cohorts who entered the labor market when the recession started. And as I mentioned before, the ILR in this case has been fundamental to understand and to have a complete, to distinguish between vocational and academic responses, which it was very interesting in this case because we found that basically they reacted in totally different ways. And also to have basically a complete picture of all the possible education choices together with the Key Stage 5 and ESA data. And then finally, a third project on the evolution of apprenticeships. So this is again going back to apprenticeships, but this project is, slightly different from the first in the sense that is using the ILR linked with NPD data. Well, ILR on its own and ILR linked with the NPD data. This was a project, is a descriptive project that aims to look at what happens to the characteristics of apprenticeships, to the number of apprenticeship starts in the last, between 2015 and 2020, motivated by the fact that in those years there have been major policy changes. And so we wanted to see how this affected the changes in apprenticeships. And given that this was a work commissioned by the Sutton Trust, we were also very interested in looking at whether this had implication for social mobility and equity. So we basically used the full ILR. We called it raw ILR. I don't know if this term still applies, but the ILR on its own to look at the full ILR population. And then we also used ILR link MPD for young apprentices so that we could have more information on their characteristics, such as whether they were FSM eligible, their prior attainment, more in details, and their demographics. And we looked at created some characteristics, some key variables such as the starts, the level of sector composition, the duration, the achievement rates, whether they were dropping out, and also the progression pathways. So, as mentioned before, we were able to look at to retain a lot of variables for the ILR. So we basically, for the overall sample, we took all the possible information from the ILR, whereas for the youngest apprenticeships, we took all the social demographic characteristics from the NPD. And we basically only used apprenticeships. So we use again the prog type variable to identify apprenticeships. And we created, we make sure that we could link learners over time in order to see the progression pathways and to see whether a person starting on an apprenticeship of a certain level was able to progress over time. And so it happens, or at least what I noticed when using the ILR is that there are sometimes the level or the subject, even the guided learning hours might be missing. So in that case, we complement it with LARS. So we just through the learner a reference, as Dave mentioned, we match it with LARS data, and you can basically substitute the missing information there. And but here we found that starts fell, the composition shifted towards higher and degree apprenticeships, but the disadvantaged groups are increasingly left behind at higher levels. And why did we need the ILR here? Well, maybe it's even more apparent than in the second project, but obviously it allows us to get the full picture of the full population who gets public funded training, and in a very big detail. So here, just to summarize, and maybe I don't even need to kind of go over this because it's much of this information has already been covered by Dave. And well, just a key limitation maybe that it may be worth mentioning. It only covers public funded provisions. So, for example, self-funded training or employer-funded trainings are not in the ILR. And
thank you, Chiara. Really fascinating studies there. And then finally we have Claire.
Thank you very much. I'll just try and get my slides up on screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see those. Please shout if you can't. So we've had some great introductory presentations from Dave and Chiara, providing really rich insight into what the ILR contains and the kind of ways that it's been used for research outside of the ECHILD context. So what I'm going to try and do in the next few minutes is just, I guess, bring it back a little bit to what kinds of questions does the fact that ILR is now included in ECHILD open up for people to focus on in future? I'm sure people on the call will have many ideas of their own, much more sophisticated than the kind of small examples I've included here. But just to kind of whet your appetite, we'll talk about a couple of cases. And then I also thought it might be helpful to help people think through whether ECHILD is the right data set for them to be answering their research questions. So obviously the great thing about education administrative data sets is that it is available in a number of different places. It contributes to a number of different linked data sets. And so just being really clear which elements of the data you need and whether therefore ECHILD is critical to what you're interested in or not might be, will hopefully be a useful exercise to think through. So we don't need to spend very long on the overview because Chiara and David provided a great summary. But I think the key thing that I've used ILR data for in my own research is really to get that picture of what people are doing after they've done their GCSEs at age 16 and have moved on to an education institution that might not be a school sixth form, and a sixth form attached to a school. So if they've gone on to an FE college, if they've gone on to another type of college, maybe if they're doing an apprenticeship where they're working as well as doing training, the ILR is the place where you're going to find out about that. So it captures all of the types of vocational qualifications that are on offer to people through those routes. So Chiara talked about apprenticeships, but also some of the new vocational qualifications that have been introduced more recently, like T levels, and I assume V levels will appear in there when they kind of come into being as well. So as well as the type of qualification, you see the subjects that are being studied from quite a granular to quite a kind of aggregated level. So you can see people who are studying health-related qualifications, for example, or business or leisure and so on. And then you can also see whether the person has completed the qualification or not. So did they attend and then drop out, or did they go on to finish that qualification? So that's going to be really helpful being brought into ECHILD to answer a kind of bunch of questions. And I've just listed a few potential examples here, which try to draw on the kind of fantastic information that's available in ECHILD on the health side, and also kind of link that a little bit more concretely to how you could use that in parallel with this ILR data to answer some kind of more specific research questions. So for example, perhaps you might be interested in children who are born with low birth weight or whose mothers have particular characteristics. Maybe it's that they've been treated for postnatal depression, and you're interested not only in what those children's outcomes look like in school, which you can already do from the NPD, but you're also interested in their attainment beyond the school system, which might include level 3 vocational qualifications, for example. So you would need the ILR in order to get a kind of complete picture of people's qualifications at level 3, which might come through the school system or through the college system. Similarly, you might be interested in children who've experienced particular health circumstances. Maybe they've had an acute health crisis, or they've got a chronic medical condition, and you want to understand whether those experiences might have affected their choices about what they end up studying themselves. So the ILR can give you that opportunity to see whether people have gone on to study health-related qualifications after GCSEs, for example. Or you might be interested in young people who are receiving mental health treatment for mental health challenges. That might be kind of during their earlier school careers, but it also could potentially be at the same time as they're studying for post-16 qualifications. So maybe you're interested in understanding the kind of interrelationship between mental health and completing education qualifications. And so the ILR will be really helpful for picking up people who might perhaps have been on a trajectory which isn't taking them through that academic pathway and the school system. Or similarly, maybe you're interested in special educational needs, or perhaps more specifically, people who've been diagnosed with a particular condition through the health data, and whether they choose different pathways to those who are more neurotypical. So these are all questions that you might be able to get partial answers to through the existing data that the NPD has brought to ECHILD, but you would really get that complete picture of understanding the full breadth of what all types of qualifications are being studied through the addition of this ILR data. Okay, so that gives you a kind of bit of a flavour. This is a slight experiment, so I'm going to ask you if you are willing to engage in this Menti quiz, which basically just presents a series of short research questions and asks you to think about whether you really need ECHILD to answer that, or whether you can do it just as well with NPD and ILR data alone, or actually whether you might need the LEO data, which takes out health records and adds in earnings and benefit data. I don't think this will be a clickable link, so I'll ask someone who has access to the chat to just copy and paste it in there for people to click on if you don't want to scan the QR code and do it on your phone. And I'll just give you a couple of minutes to complete the quiz if you're happy to participate, and then we'll talk through the results on screen. So I'll just leave the QR code up for a moment, and then in a minute or so I'm going to stop sharing and move to the Menti screen so we can look through the results. If anyone's having problems with it, please do shout out. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that screen and I'm going to share on the Menti screen now instead. Okay. Can people see the screen that's got the Menti results on it? Hopefully it should just look like a web page, nothing more sophisticated than that. Okay, so the first question was whether boys are more likely to study STEM, science, technology, engineering and math subjects than girls post 16. So the options here were, can you do that using NPD and ILR only? Can you do it using ECHILD only? Can you do it using LEO only? All of these data sets or none of these data sets? So most people probably clicked the first one they came to, and you're absolutely right. You can do that just using NPD ILR. You don't need ECHILD to do it. But because the NPD and ILR data is included in both ECHILD and LEO, like both of those data sets are in all three of them, you can answer that question using all three data sets. But you wouldn't want to apply for ECHILD to answer that question specifically, because obviously you're having to kind of jump through hurdles to potentially be able to access health data that you don't need to, because you could get it from these separate data sets. So well done, most people there. Okay, the next one was about people whose siblings experience mental health difficulties and whether they themselves might be more likely to go on and study health-related qualifications. So most people identifying correctly that ECHILD would be the data set you'd want to rely on there. So ECHILD is really the only of these data sets which systematically allows you to identify siblings through the mother-child link. So there are a small number of cohorts in LEO where you can see a sibling match, but if you're interested in what's happening to different children in the same family, ECHILD is really the best one to be using. And of course, that's also the only one where you're going to see mental health difficulties outside of the special educational needs identification system. So definitely one where you'd want to try and use ECHILD here. So thirdly, this was a question about later earnings. So who earns more at age 25? People who've done kind of vocational qualifications in construction, or those with degrees. Here, again, most people spotting correctly that you'd need LEO for that, because the NPD, ILR and ECHILD data don't have that link to HMRC and DWP data, as I think Katie put in the chat earlier in response to a question. Just a couple more here. So how likely are children with experience of the social care systems going to achieve a level 3 qualification? So Katie identified earlier that social care data is part of the a part of ECHILD, and it's also part of the data that is typically shared through the National Pupil Database. And so actually this is a question you could in principle again answer with any of these 3 data sets. So again, if you want to apply to ECHILD, you really want to be sure that you're making use of that additional health information that ECHILD is bringing, and not necessarily just relying on it if you're mainly interested in the social care data outside of the health related implications of that. And finally, one about young people identified as having special educational needs. Are they more likely to study vocational qualifications than peers without those needs or identified needs? And again, lots of people correctly identifying this is another question where you can look at it from any of these data sets perspectives, because they all include that information. So thank you very much to people for engaging in that short quiz. I'm going to stop sharing now. There's a table in the slides which kind of summarises those findings if anyone wants to refer to them afterwards. But now I think we've got a final few minutes for questions. So Katie, I'll hand back over to you so you can share those questions.
Thank you, all 3 of you. That's been extremely informative and really helpful to help think about what we can use in the ILR in ECHILD for. We've got a couple of questions in the chat already. Is there an ILR user group to help share expertise?
There is not. There should be. There really should be. It's one of those. I think for anyone using education administrative data set, it is notoriously the most complicated of the data sets. But I think Dave in particular has got resources that are shareable and accessible for people who can to kind of support people to use it. And equally, we through our work on the Leo data set and the Leo community hub that we have do have some code and so on that would support people in using ILR, which I'm sure we can make available more widely as well.
Okay, thanks, Claire. I think this one's for you as well, considering what you've just presented. So we've got a hypothetical question here about the research study. Could you use the ECHILD linkage to describe the educational journeys of children with specific health condition, i.e. juvenile idiopathic arthritis, who go on to A-levels, vocational training and university? And there's a question about where the A-levels are captured.
The A-level, yeah, Dave, do you want to go on that?
Sorry, I have put half an answer into that. Yes, that sounds doable to me. For those in schools, you could see the fact that students are doing A-levels in census learning aims. And for those who are in the FE sector, you could see the fact that they're doing A-levels in ILR aims.
So I think that's a yes.
Sounds a lot like a yes, so that's great. Thanks.
As long as you're confident on the health information side, I think we're confident on the education trajectory side for sure.
That's just about the only thing I am confident on at the minute. So.
Okay, Lola suggested maybe the Leo Hub could pick up the ILR user group there.
So I think if people do have specific questions about the ILR, I'm very if you're accredited to use the SRS, then you can join the Leo Community Hub. And yeah, you're welcome. There's a kind of forum where you can post questions. There's also some supporting resources. So yeah, I'm not going to volunteer to run a separate ILR user group, but very happy for people to kind of use the Leo Community Hub to ask questions about ILR. And we will also have going forward kind of annual events where people using MPD and potentially ILR and Leo can kind of get together and share swap notes and so on. So hopefully people will be able to make use of those opportunities as well.
Maybe it'd be helpful, Claire, for you to just describe the distinction between ECHILD and Leo, or what's included in Leo that's not currently in ECHILD.
Yeah, very happy to. So I think the main thing that ECHILD has that Leo doesn't is all the health information. So if you are interested in anything to do with health, ECHILD is the place for you and Leo is not. But Leo includes all of the education data set and social care data sets that ECHILD does, and then adds onto those some additional linked administrative data sets, primarily records from HMRC, capturing people's kind of employment and earnings information, and from DWP on their out of work benefit claims. So it allows you to follow individuals through the education system and then on beyond where ECHILD currently is into the labour market. But it doesn't capture all that very rich information that you have in ECHILD on health. So that I think is the key distinction at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe at some point in the future we'll have a super ECHILD Leo combined data set, but
that would be great.
That will happen just yet. Okay. Any other questions that I've missed from the chat or that you would like to put your hand up and ask? There's a question about SEN and if that's reported in providers that aren't schools post-16 in the ILR, and I think Dave said yes, there are flags. Yep. I think that was most of the questions. So if there aren't any more questions, then I'll just end with a bit of an update of where we are with I'll come back to you, Lola, with the ECHILD linkage at the moment. So we've been due a refresh for a number of years now, and very happy to say that the linkage between the updated MPD data and the NHS data has now been completed, including all of the ILR data. So that would take us to, well, we haven't seen the data yet, so I can't confirm for certain, but either at the very least until the end of March 25 for the health data, possibly later on in the year, and to the end of the 24-25 academic year for the MPD data. So the health data and the linkage line are currently being ingested onto the ONS SRS by the SRS team, and hopefully will be made available in the next few months. And the MPD update is imminently going to be transferred over to the SRS as well. So we'll keep you all up to date with that, and when the new data are available to request, we will let you know. But yeah, very positive news. Lola.
Brilliant. I've loved every second of this. I've got a question thinking here from lots of different hats on, and I've seen similar research questions, splicing data in different ways across both Leo and ECHILD, creating kind of like thematic approaches, using different data to kind of fill the richness of specific questions. And if I was a researcher who's not familiar with the ins and outs of the data and understanding the limitations of particular data sets, but I knew my research question could be answered with both, what would be your advice and the approach to really understanding what data set I could use and who I could go to for kind of almost confirmation that this is the right approach for both ECHILD and Leo, please? Because I've seen it and it's interesting, and as an outsider, I'm not sure I'd know where to go.
Shall I chip in on Leo first, Katie? So for people interested in Leo, I would say come to one of our training courses, which we run at least once a year. And I think the next ones are going to be coming up at the start of the next academic year, September, October time. So that will give you a really good overview of what is available in Leo, the types of research people have been using with it. And following those courses, we offer kind of short there's always during the sessions plenty of opportunity for discussion and people to ask questions about their own research and whether the data can help them address it. But we also offer the possibility for people to have like a one-to-one follow-up with one of the presenters where they can really get into the kind of detail of what they're interested in if they haven't been able to answer the questions during the session. So that is a kind of very specific way in which you can do it if you've got quite a tailored question that you want. But there are also, of course, user guides and the notorious variable request form that you have to kind of trawl through in order to figure out which specific things are in the data and what you need to request. So If you're a complete newbie, you can go onto the ADR UK website and watch a short video about Leo, look at all that documentation, and then if that's kind of whetted your appetite, come along to one of the training courses for that more detailed follow-up.
Yeah, and for ECHILD, I think the first protocol is our mailbox, so the ich.echild email address. And if we aren't able to answer your question, we're usually able to put you in touch with someone who should be able to answer your questions. And then we've also got the GitHub discussion board, which I'll put the link for here now. So you can raise any questions on here, and anybody then in the ECHILD community can answer your question. So that's another good place to come. And then, yeah, we've also got our ECHILD User Day, which is once a year, and we'll be running a training session later in the year as well. There's a question there. I'll let you. Yeah, thanks, Beth. Right. Okay. Thanks, everybody. It's been really helpful session. Thank you especially to our three brilliant presenters today, Dave, Chiara, and Claire. And yeah, we'll be in touch again soon with information about the next seminar. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.